Today we're going to replace the water pump on a 2005 Chrysler Town & Country 3.8 liter One of these things is not like the other. Here's the one I just took out. See anything missing? Maybe the impeller? I don't know. I think this is supposed to have one. Oh, I see you hiding in there, Mr. Impeller. You get out of that hole. You're supposed to be on that shaft. Get out of there. One of the little tips with these water pump replacements is you've got this gasket. Actually requires no silicone or anything, but since you've got to lift this water pump up into place in this position here, and you don't want that gasket falling out of there and getting lost. So before you put that gasket on, if you dab on a couple drops here and there of this super adhesive stuff, it'll keep that gasket in place while you get it up into position. A little bit of background on this job. I was coming home on the highway one day, and not sure if this has anything to do with it, but I'd kind of pulled out in front of somebody, so I hit the gas kind of hard, accelerated up to 60 miles an hour, no big deal. Driving down the road a little bit farther, all of a sudden, ding 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 ding, car's hot. I look up, temperature gauge is pegged past the H. So I look for a place to pull over, but before I can pull over, I decide to turn the heater on full blast to try and help out cool the engine. Turned it on high, got hot air for about 15 seconds, then surprised me, it starts to blow out cold air. Now that doesn't make any sense. Got to a gas station, pulled in, shut the car off, come out, pop the hood. I expected to see, water, radiator hose blown, who knows what, rear heater core, I don't know what, but I expected to see water all over the place. None of that's true. Heater hose up, or radiator hose up here, hotter than hot, solid as a rock, lots of pressure in there. I look over at the coolant reservoir, and it's always down there between the two marks where it's supposed to be, but it's almost up to the neck up here, so like an extra half a gallon in there. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So I wait a while, let it cool back down. Long story short, after a couple of stops along the highway, got it home. Thought, well, this is a classic example of a thermostat that's sticking. So I replaced the thermostat, went out for a test drive, surprised to find again no heat coming out the blower as the engine was, heating up to normal temp. That was a surprise. Then all of a sudden the gauge started rising rather quickly. Before long, ding 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 ding, high temp again. Got her home. Now what I'm suspecting is that I've got a water pump issue. So I did a YouTube search for 2005 Chrysler Town & Country overheating, and I ran across a 2001 Dodge Caravan, no heat, overheating, water pump issue. And basically what he found out after a lot of trial and error, all the same stuff. He tried the thermostat, he tried a new radiator cap, he tried flushing the radiator and heater cores. He had people telling him he needed a new head gasket, all kinds of stuff. Finally replaced the water pump. When he got the old one off, these plastic impellers were all broke off. So we'll see if that's what we've got, or if perhaps the impeller is just spinning on the shaft. but it certainly appears, as in this case, that I have no water pumping around this engine and through the heater cores. There's a lot of good videos out there on how to change the water pump on a 2005 Chrysler Town & Country, so I'm going to skip quite a few steps, but basically got the tire off, get the splash shield off of there. That'll expose the water pump back in up here. We're going to loosen the motor mount, put a block of wood under the oil pan, loosen the motor mount, allow the engine to come down a little bit. That'll give us a little better access to the bolts. We'll go from there. Just pry those pins out with some kind of a tool like this or whatever you've got. Get that splice shield up out of the way. Now you can see in here, this is your crankshaft. This up here is your water pump pulley. If you do what I say and lower the engine down a little bit by loosening the motor mount and putting the block under the oil pan, you can get this down to where you can get a little better access. Of course, we're going to have to pop that serpentine belt loose, but we want to crack those bolts loose before we take off the serpentine belt. That's one of the tricks. Before you take that serpentine belt loose, get a 13mm wrench up in there. Get all three of those bolts holding on the pulley loosened up. You can see the belt tensioner up here. You can stick this one looks like a 1/2 inch. If you can get something in there, I've got a serpentine belt tool which I will use to stick in there, and in this case pull down on that. That'll release the tension and I can slip this serpentine belt off of that water pump pulley. This is a serpentine belt tool. Long skinny rod with a 3/8 inch stud square welded on the end there, so it's real narrow. You can get it into a tight spot. If you got a 1/2 inch, you can slip this on there and you got a 1/2 inch. So these things are a great help. I would recommend one if you're going to be doing work on your own cars. Under the hood there'll be a little detail like this that shows how your serpentine belt wiggles through the pulleys. I like to kind of sketch myself one here, that way when I'm laying underneath there I can orient it in the direction that I'm working on and kind of see how things go. You can kind of get that belt off of the water pump pulley, kind of tuck it up in there like that, get it out of the way. Now next, after first loosening those bolts with the serpentine belt on, I used a 13mm wrench to get those 3 bolts out. Now in a perfect world you'd be able to just take this pulley out, but it doesn't appear that there's enough room to get this out. And that may be where we have to lower the engine down a little bit to gain just a little bit of space. Otherwise we could move it out of the way, and it looks like we could probably fight our way around and get those bolts in there, or get them out. We're going to need to drain the antifreeze out, and I've found the best way is here at the lower radiator hose. Just kind of carefully pop that off, leave the radiator cap on, and it won't come out of there real fast. You know, just work it barely off the end. And then I found that the kids' sled works great for catching antifreeze. If you're going to lower the engine down, you're going to want to get a block of wood underneath the oil pan. To make it a little bit easier to get to these 3 motor mount bolts, we're going to pop this air cleaner housing off, remove this hose, pop this little hose out of its bracket, loosen this clamp here, and then you can get to the sensor back here, pop the red tab out, squeeze it and pull it off. Slide that red clip up. That'll allow you to get that connector off. I've got the jack, block of wood under the oil pan. At some point you're going to want to get in there and make sure that that pulley that you've got loose is not in a position where when the engine comes down it's going to want to crush it or anything. But go ahead and get these 3 bolts loose off the motor mount. Now you can get pretty good access to 4 out of the 5 bolts. One of them is hidden up there to the upper and then towards the back. That one you may have to crawl underneath the car here and reach up from behind with a wrench and get it. Or if you're lucky, maybe you can get through the pulley. But you're going to have to get those bolts out. That's the next step. This is one of these deals where you kind of want to rack the guy who designed this so you couldn't get this pulley out. I mean, come on. Another, half an inch or a little better design. Anyway, you can just barely, I've got a wrench there in the center of the screen. It's on that top bolt. One of these things is not like the other. Here's the one I just took out. See anything missing? Maybe the impeller? I don't know. I think this is supposed to have one. Oh, I see you hiding in there, Mr. Impeller. You get out of that hole. You're supposed to be on that shaft. Get out of there. Well, here he is, Mr. Impeller. He's supposed to be pressed onto here. But if you can see real closely, if I could stop shaking, there's a crack. So, there was my overheating problem. Right there. You'll want to put a thin coat of some kind of gasket adhesive to hold the new gasket in there. I've used this 3M yellow super weather strip and gasket adhesive. You need to hold that gasket in place because you're going to be sticking this up into a tight spot. You don't want that gasket falling out. Silicone would also work. It'll take a little longer to dry. Since there's no silicone or anything, there's not much to clean up, but you're going to want to wipe off that gasket surface and then basically reverse order put this thing back together. The main point of this video was to show that water pump impeller. I knew that either came off the shaft like it did, or somehow it disintegrated in there and turned into a blender and chewed all them impeller fins off. I didn't know which one, but we weren't moving any water. So that was the main point of this video. Again, lots of videos out there if you want to see how to replace this water pump. One tip I haven't seen in any of the other videos is I put a bungee cord in here, draped it down. I've got it wrapped around that pulley so I can get it into the position I want and it'll stick there. Keep it out of my way while I'm trying to get that bolt in. Bungee cord on the pulley, then hopefully can get up to that bolt hole right up in there. That's the tough one. You'll spend all your time messing around there. Okay, one more tip. That hard to get bolt is a real bear if you're going to try and get it. From sitting over here, standing over here, anything, crouch position by the passenger side wheel, you're not going to get it. What I finally had to do is, I've got the car jacked up in the air. I put extra jack stands underneath it. I went in feet first, crawled my way under till my head was about right under the water pump, feet hanging out over by the driver's side door. Then I could get my arm up through some of this suspension stuff. My elbow was up by this inner tie rod CV joint bushing, and then I could basically get good access to that bolt. And then if I kind of did a reverse grip on the wrench, it worked out real well. You had to kind of think about which way is tight, because by that time you're turned around backwards. But it actually is not a bad bolt to get to if you do that. So slide your feet in from over here on the passenger side, on your back, work your way in, facing straight up. Find a little spot in through here. Make sure you got a light shining up in there so you get good light. It's really not that bad. I do want to emphasize, before you fillet yourself out underneath the car, make sure it's on jack stands. They're seated good. In this case, I've got the jack under the oil pan, another jack stand over there, another jack stand for protection, tire underneath. Can't be too careful when you're just laying under there flat on your back. We'll go ahead and get these 3 bolts. Okay, the pump's back on. Checking to see if there's any wobble. Sometimes the new water pumps, the holes are off center. You want to make sure that new water pump pulley, or at least the old pulley on the new water pump, is not wobbling.